morning and welcome to ADMA Unplugged. I am really delighted this morning to be joined by Gary Hardwick, who is the founder and chairman of Ikon 3, joining us all the way from New York City. So good evening, I think it is, Gary, to you over in New York.
That's right, Jodie. Yeah, 7 p.m. on a Thursday night here. Good morning to you.
See, that's dedication. Thank you. So I'm going to get straight into the questioning. We have about kind of 25 minutes to pick your brains on everything that's going on, both in terms of your agency, what's happening in New York, and what we think the trends are coming up for the future. So just want to start with a bit of background from you, really, and your career and how you've got to where you are. So obviously you've had a long career in media and advertising. You've worked both in the UK, in Australia, and now in New York. But at certain points in your career, you decided to set up Ikon in Australia and move from being within a big network agency into your own agency with one client, which at the time was Commonwealth Bank, and set up on your own. So what was it that spurred you from going from a great job that you had to saying, you know what, I do want to set up something on my own and do it differently? What was the driver behind it, and what did you do differently?
In terms of the actual setup. Sorry, Jodie. Although I'm not sure. Okay, sorry. I think I am live, so I'm going to keep going. So, what did we do differently? Well, I think in the very early days, you know, we looked. Simon White and myself collaborated going back to late 1998 and looked at the marketplace at the time, and there was a clear window to actually create an offering that was distinct. It was certainly an opportunity to be very different, and also, most important, to be client aligned around producing strong commercial results at that time. And that was the sort of the founding of the Ikon Communications business. I think looking ahead to the move to New York in 2010 or late 2010, when we were setting up Ikon 3, what we really were doing, we were trying to be the antidote to what was frustrating about dealing with some of the larger media networks and media shops here. So what I mean by that is, you know, we kept on hearing that they were slow to market, often disconnected from the client's business objectives, and I mean business objectives, not necessarily just their media objectives. And they were really only excited with dealing with you know, the safety of large marketing or media budgets. The other thing that I think you know, we've looked at and tried to differentiate around has been building a very senior team, more like a business consultancy, if you like. And those senior partners have actually come from integrated creative shops. So there's a style, if you like, and a language and a philosophy that you get from here that you just don't get from the larger holding media shops. That impacts what we believe is our relationships with our creative partners that we work alongside enormously, because they know that we don't just treat you know, our work independently of theirs. It matters to us that, you know, the work is actually good and of a very, very high standard. So I think that's probably, yeah, probably the main reason.
So you went from Ikon Australia to now Ikon 3 in New York. What's the relationship between the two? What is the relationship between the two?
Very small relationship. I mean, you know, if you date back to the beginning of '99 when I set Ikon Communications up with Simon White, we built that business independently through to 2006, and then we were acquired by the STW Group. Simon and I entered into a earn-out period, and as I was nearing the end of that, I had a desire to come to New York and challenge myself personally. And I invited the STW Group, if you like, to come along for the ride. So they are a passive minority equity partner in the New York operation. And the thought behind that was really, looking at the goodwill of the Ikon Communications name and its reputation in market, and trying to carry that across into the US or New York market. The irony of it, if you like, or reality, was that that didn't materialize. More and more, as we were going out and talking to US-based marketers and trying to show sort of proof of concept from Australia, they were saying, look, that's great, and they're interesting case studies, and we see that you work around a high degree of innovation, but what have you done here, and kind of what have you done in our category or in our industry? So it's kind of taken us 2 years to even break through and create a kind of highly differentiated position for the business.
So when you set up in New York, did you have a kind of foundation client that you went over for, or was it kind of greenfield? You decided New York was the place you wanted to be and go and kind of tackle that market and just took off and from there.
Yeah, the latter, unfortunately. I had the joy and pleasure of launching Ikon with Simon with the Commonwealth Bank as our foundation client, and it always helps to have a blue chip client, someone like Commonwealth Bank, which is obviously the largest financial services provider in Australia and touches 1 in 2 Australians in terms of a relationship. And I think in that first year of operation, we billed something like $46 million in media billing. So from day one, we were 13 staff, and we had a reasonable amount of critical mass and a very important client behind us. The approach in New York was somewhat different. I partnered with Droga 5 through an old relationship. David Droga and I worked together in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s. And I believe that by embedding our practice into Droga 5 and bringing the creative and media practice back together, we would see some great synergies, and we'll be able to sort of leverage off each other. And in truth, Ikon 3 really leveraging off the good name and reputation of Droga 5.
So it brings up an interesting point about the differentiation or the relationship between creative agencies and media agencies, and we're seeing more and more that there is an overlap between the two, and often a little bit of competition that's sitting between the two. So is that something that you've experienced, that going into this with Droga 5, who is a very different type of agency? How have you made that relationship work, considering the overlaps that we're now seeing?
Look, you're absolutely right, absolutely true. I mean, if you think now to who Ikon 3's competitors are, we don't necessarily just look at the very tight-knit and tight-held competitive set of media agencies, independent, and then the large media agency networks. We see a whole raft of new competitors, and it's not just creative agencies that are introducing channel planning capability into their midst or digital planning capability. It's whole new competitors like Salesforce or Adobe, even Google. Have actually, they are definitely a frenemy, and Facebook themselves. You can definitely see are moving towards having relationships direct with client and sort of eliminating the agency relationship. So. And then you've got the whole raft of business consultants that are moving more upstream and working with the C-suite like Deloitte, Accenture, and PwC that all have media offerings or various media hybrid offerings in the marketplace. So it is a very commoditized and a very cluttered market, and it's often very hard to stand out within that. I mean, the other thing I think as well is if you think about agencies for a second, we've operated typically as a kind of closed system network, and yet the broader industry, the marketing industry, the business marketplace is moving way more towards open systems that are taking over the industry and the creative industry. So that presents an interesting challenge as well.
So how, first of all, it is a challenged market at the moment, and we hear it all the time. It doesn't matter whether actually you're a media agency or creative agency or even one of the other tech sectors. It really is cluttered and everyone is stepping over each other. What do you believe the future model is for the successful media agency? What does it actually look like in 2 to 5 years' time?
In terms of a successful agency structure, I think there's probably some critical steps to getting that right. I think looking at things like the investment behind the agency network itself, understanding that CMOs are actually becoming kind of entwined and working much more closely with the CIOs and CTOs of their own businesses. And in fact, I read a report recently that the CMO will become the largest or biggest customer of the CIO within many of our marketing clients' businesses. So understanding that relationship and making sure that we're there of service and support from a technological perspective. I think considering employing a lead technologist, someone who can actually decipher some of the disruptive technologies overall in the marketplace, and then obviously looking at how they can be integrated back for ad campaigns and for the broader business overall as well. The provision of proper data management, so using an actual data management platform, and then working out what the architecture for that looks like, and then streamlining the client-specific and real-time marketing needs through that and using that. And then I also think the kind of old adage of 90% of the money going into media and 10% going to production is very outdated now with disruptive technologies and with the number of platforms and what's happened in the digital ecosystem. The fact that marketers now need to deploy more content and in order to be relevant and to generate more kind of inbound marketing. So I would argue that ratio probably starts to look more like 50-50. That is 50% of the money being deployed into media and media targeting or hyper-targeting, and then as much as 50% or even more into actually developing unique bits of content to be deployed and repurposed.
So just touching on two of those areas that you've mentioned, one is data, which obviously is a subject that's close to my heart, and the other being technology. So what role does data now play within media agencies, and have you had to change the skill set within the media agency to be able to deliver on a new data expectation from a client's perspective?
Yeah, look, most certainly we had to. I think if you think about the whole revolution of targeting and kind of hyper-targeting, if you like, it's probably worth just touching on exactly what hyper-targeting is. I don't know the seniority of your attendees, but let's assume that everyone doesn't know the term hyper-targeting. So it's the ability to obviously deliver advertising content to specific interest-based segments in any given network, whether it's a social network, an ad network, or otherwise. And typically, that level of sophistication is being drawn from three sources. The first is registration data, age, sex, the location of the registrant, and so on. It can be drawn from things like their profile. So that's the detailed content that we see from users, the movies they go to see, the music that they engage in, or the brands that they relate to or are advocates of. And then finally, behavioural, which is sites that are visited, purchases made, or in fact intention data to actually purchase. So the beauty of hyper-targeting is that we're talking to highly engaged users about things that they really do care about, because we're targeting those special interests and we're reaching them at a time when they want to be reached. So hyper-targeting and hyper-tagging, I believe have certainly revolutionised the media game and will certainly continue to do so. And I say media game in the broadest sense, in that it touches many agencies, but in particular, obviously, media planners and the hybrid buyers are having to look at that and consider that. The only other thing I touch on there is beware. I say beware because just because you can hyper-target and you can get down to sub-segments and keep layering, it doesn't mean you should. You should always be mindful of the sample sizes, the segments that you're beginning to sort of draw upon and look at to hyper-target, and make sure that they can fit back into the brand or business objectives that have been set. Going too small might not actually deliver enough to actually deliver the objectives. And then finally, I think letting the technologies actually do their jobs. So we're now dealing with very sophisticated algorithms that inform the brain of many of the platforms that media agencies are using more and more. And that allows for rapid learning and then refinement, optimization, and then improving the performance on behalf of clients. But I would say it is still very much a balance between human ingenuity and machines. So to think that machines will just automate and that's it would be very foolish.
And I think that's exactly right. Sorry.
Yeah. Look, I think the last thing I'd touch on with sort of hyper-targeting and the use of data like that is it's only part of the actual demonstration to make a brand useful, in the eyes of the consumer. I think the user experience has to be factored into and considered too. That's if we agree that the user experience is obviously any interaction a customer or even a potential customer has with a client's brand. So, if you go back to media planning in the 90s, it evolved into the 2000s to channel planning or comms planning. And then as digital started to create further expansion of channels and so on, I would argue that we now need to incorporate a level of user experience planning into our overall thinking as well. So I think the agencies of the future will be those that, yes, think about channels and their use, and the right use within the channel, but also the actual user experience at the time that the brand's being deployed.
So I think I would say you're exactly right on the kind of statement that you made around data and technology, and the two do sit hand in hand, but really they're not the answer to every problem that we have. And one of the big challenges that we have here in Australia is around actually the skills gap and getting the people that can both understand the data, can use the technology to get the insights that are driving great marketing and advertising campaigns. And what type of people have you brought within Ikon 3 to be able to deliver that and truly use the data to provide that insight? Has it been a new skill set you've had to bring in, or have you upskilled your current team so that they've got that understanding and can bring that new level of expertise?
Look, I would like to say that we've only brought in fully digital rounded thinkers who are hybrids. But there's a degree of specialisation we've had to bring in that informs to the kind of integrated thinking process that goes on. But by and by, what I try to do is find senior practitioners that have a deep passion and love for digital, and therefore are well informed across all channels, not just traditional media channels, if you like. I think the other thing here actually is the mistake of seeing creative and media being pulled apart and divorced. And I say that having benefited from that by creating a media agency or a media independent through Australia and building out over a number of years with my business partner Simon. I think creative media obviously has to work alongside each other in order to operate in a new paradigm. And in fact, that's always been the case, but it becomes more pronounced when you consider disruptive technologies that provide hyper-targeting opportunities. Ikon 3, what we've tried to do is evolve certain roles. A very important role within the agency right now is the Chief Creative Strategist. And that grew out of really the old comms planner role, but with a greater emphasis on connecting the creative work with the actual communication strategy. It requires an understanding or talking the same language as those who are actually creating the content. So we work extra hard with our creative partners to ensure that there is that understanding in place, and we can execute to that. The other thing is that the chief creative strategist should be a competent brand planner as well as a comms planner. So brands and media, I think, got separated a long time ago, and we're trying to actually bring that back together because we just feel it's insanity not to. So yeah.
So actually, I just wanted to let everyone know who's listening, if you've got questions, then please feel free to type them in, and I'll try and get to them before we end this quick interview. It's quite an interesting one, a chief creative strategist. Where have you got that person from? I mean, has they come from a creative, has your chief creative strategist come from a creative background or a different background and then added the kind of creative part onto it?
Look, the person, I can tell you who the person is, an Australian. His name is Todd Alchin. He worked with me in the Ikon communications business in Australia. He worked for Bellamy Hayden and the Media Palace, well, obviously when Media Palace was embedded within the Campaign Palace. And then more recently here in the US, he worked as a comms or channel planner, head of planning, at Crispin Porter Bogowski in Boulder, where creative and media are absolutely entwined, and they sit with each other and in fact feed off each other, if you like. So Todd's skill set is quite unique in that he's done brand planning before, he's done the media and comms planning role, and he has been embedded within the creative department of a very successful creative agency. So, he had all of the facets that I was looking for in that lead role. And in truth, he's been invaluable to the business in terms of how we forged relationships with the likes of Mother, Droga 5, Anomaly, and some of the big creative agency partners we work alongside here in New York.
That's great. And I think it really does show these kind of hybrid roles that are now starting to emerge, both in Australia and obviously over in the US. I just wanted to move quickly to a cultural issue, because whenever we hear about Ikon 3, we always hear about the amazing culture that the agency has. And this philosophy of, I think it's called iconoclastic by nature. So tell me about that. What does it mean? How does it bring kind of a different way of thinking to the agency?
Look, yeah, it's the name stemmed actually from obviously when Simon and I first set the business up, and we felt at that time that the sort of standard way of doing things in terms of media planning and media buying were a little outdated and in time for a bit of a shake-up. So in '99 we set about doing that, and we did that by truly partnering the marketing department with the Commonwealth Bank and embedding ourselves within the department, working with the business stakeholder to actually understand the role of comms, and then also with the media buying process actually trading the money and not committing it to annualized deals. So that was sort of the iconoclastic origins of the business. I think today what we're trying to do, I said a little bit earlier, is be that antidote for what's frustrating about dealing with the larger media shops in town. We can respond very quickly because of the seniority of the people within the business. In fact, often we challenge clients. If we feel we've got a good handle on the brief itself, we'll turn very high level and smart business thinking around in a 48-hour window and represent to clients. And clients are often amazed in this market at how we can sort of turn it on a dime and come back and be highly relevant on behalf of the client. So, that's definitely being iconoclastic here compared to the kind of slow, lumbering way and siloed way of dealing with the media process. And the other thing as well is that because it's very senior people on our side, we are able to influence the C-suite and have more of their time. And I'd certainly say way more time than the average media agency holding group here in the US.
So just in the interest of time, we've got about 2 minutes left, and again, if anyone's got any questions, any more questions, then please type them in now as we're running out of time. But one thing I was interested in is coming from Australia into the New York market. I mean, there are differences, and I've obviously gone the other way from New York into the Australian market, and there are substantial differences between the two. But is there anything that you've learned in the last 2 years that you would say that we could translate into Australia that would really, be an eye-opener for media agencies here, and something that we should be taking into account?
Look, it is an interesting question. I think, broadly speaking, when you think about the challenges remain the same whether it's here or it's there. I think some of the market nuances, though, for example, would be the approach that the Australian market has towards holistic or integrated planning, and it is way better provisioned for in Australia. And I think some of that is due to the size of the market, the budgets that are being dealt with, and the fact that it makes more sense to have an integrated team working on a client piece of business rather than have it all siloed by digital, social, search, etc. The silos still pervade in the US market, and I think that is a hindrance for clients, but sometimes the scale of the spend just dictates that. Although I would argue that perhaps the larger media agency holding groups here need to dissolve that and bring it back into integrated teams for the benefit of the clients rather than the benefit of the holding group. In terms of perhaps briefing, I think there are definitely some differences. In the US, what brief? And I don't mean that flippantly, but time and time again here, we're not given any written brief whatsoever. And I think what we've been able to do is adapt to that and become very adept at listening and then interpreting the bigger issues that a client's facing. We'll then put that into an internal written brief and ask for sign-off and often nail that. There's always layers behind that, which is understanding some of the cultural context and the barriers that consumers have, obviously, to purchase. But I think that the days of self-contained, complete written briefs seem to almost have disappeared, certainly what I'm experiencing here. And to be honest, because of the seniority of the team here, we don't think that's a big deal. In fact, some ways we like arresting that control. I think Australian marketers definitely are much better at providing those written briefs. But from memory and talking to colleagues back there still, often it lists many issues and challenges rather than getting to the nub of what the main issue is or what the funds that are being deployed actually can solve. So you suddenly get a list of 12 challenges that the client has, but in truth, the funding could probably tackle the first 2 or 3. So how do you prioritise that? There's no question that the marketing role has become infinitely more complex. So we do see it as our role to assist heavily in determining what the brief is and the solution is too.
So one last question before we're out of time, which actually comes through from one of our listeners, and it's this idea that is the US market as sophisticated and innovative as we perceive here in Australia, and we're talking really from the client side rather than from the agency side. So there is this perception that the US clients are much more kind of forward-thinking, that they're very sophisticated in their marketing and media. Has that been your perception, or would you say it's actually on a par with Australian clients?
Look, I think it's probably a little bit more perception than reality. In our business dealings here, we've dealt with clients that have no objectives, and when you push them for what their objectives are, or try and work with them, they seem to be clueless about setting any specific measurable objectives around the business, whether they be media, marketing, or business objectives. And at the same time, we're dealing with an angel investor group and a very high-end business consultancy that asked us to partner with them to help them in particular with Silicon Valley startups, with a number of entrepreneurial companies and projects. and the level of sophistication coming from their leads and from the projects working on is of a very, very high standard. And I'd say, much higher than what I've been seeing typically coming out of the Australian market. So, I don't know if I'm answering it fairly, but I would say that we have everything from very dumb clients to very sophisticated clients, and I've experienced both in this marketplace. What I would say is that the provision of data, the gathering of data through third party, whether it be blue sky, first party data, bringing it together, being able to get more holistic, data driven capability is definitely there. And I think the level of sophistication is that much higher than what I've seen coming out of the Australian marketplace. But I think certainly the Australian marketplace is rapidly catching up. So from what I've seen with my interaction with Connected, my other business.
I think I'd agree with you on both fronts there. I think the Australian market, in terms of innovation, often we're seen as a different market because we don't have the scale and the budget, which can, we're still innovative, but innovative in a different way. And definitely in the data side of things, the US is much more willing to go and grab that opportunity, whereas in Australia we're much more conservative about how that data is used. We are out of time, so I just wanted to thank you so much for staying in the evening to have a chat with us today. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I know Jeff is going to raise a lot more questions that we can tackle at a later date. So thank you very, very much, Gary Hardwick.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jodie.
Thank you.